The forest was eerily silent. A man stirred awake on a bed of dry leaves, his breath shallow, his body aching, as if dragged through fire. Above him, the canopy swayed gently in the breeze, dappling the ground in flickering patches of sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay and something older, something burnt into the soil itself. He blinked slowly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. No buildings, no sounds of civilization, just the creak of trees and the distant caw of a raven. His hands were calloused, his boots worn, and on his chest the faded blue of a Union soldier's uniform, dusty, torn, with rusted brass buttons barely hanging on. A name tag had long since peeled away, and a faint bloodstain curved across his sleeve. Panic bubbled up in his throat as he sat up, disoriented. Who was he? Where was he? And more importantly, when? He looked around. Scattered near his feet were objects from another century: a dented canteen, an old Springfield rifle, a torn haversack, and a Union kepi half buried in moss. The trees bore scars, bullet holes, even a bayonet wedged into bark like a forgotten memory. It was as if time had paused mid-battle, then abandoned the scene. No smoke, no bodies, just echoes. Staggering to his feet, he brushed dirt from his coat and took his first cautious steps forward. Something about this place felt wrong, too still, too intact. There was no buzz of insects, no animal tracks, only him. Only the weight of silence pressing down on his every move. His breath quickened. If this was a battlefield, where were the men? Where was the war? He followed a barely visible trail, boots crunching softly over twigs. Each step brought more questions. Was this a dream? A punishment? A hallucination? The forest did not answer, but the shadows between the trees shifted, like they knew he was there. In the distance he saw something glinting, a piece of metal, a lantern. Hope flared in his chest. Maybe someone else was here. Maybe someone knew what was going on. He picked up his pace, eyes wide, heart pounding. Before he disappeared deeper into the trees, he glanced back at where he had woken. The leaves had already covered the impression of his body. If you are as intrigued by this mysterious journey as we are, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. There are stories hidden in the shadows of history, some true, some terrifying. Join us as we uncover them, one haunting step at a time. He moved through the forest with cautious steps, the muffled crunch of dried leaves beneath his boots the only sound accompanying him. The weight of the Union uniform clung to his body like a second skin, foreign and familiar all at once. Each step forward deepened the mystery, not just of the world around him, but of himself, of who he had once been, and why he now wandered alone through a place that felt haunted by silence. The forest path twisted and turned, revealing glimpses of a world frozen in time. Tattered tents stood in skeletal frames, their canvas walls long since shredded by wind and rain. Rusted cookware lay scattered beside cold fire pits, half filled with blackened ash that had not been stirred in years. The remnants of war clung to everything, the smell of old gunpowder, the broken crates stamped with faded military insignia, the forgotten letters buried in the dirt, their ink washed away by decades of rain. He passed what had once been a field hospital, though only the remnants remained. Blood-stained bandages had turned yellow with age, tangled in bramble and thorns. A surgical kit lay open on a wooden crate, its tools corroded and dull. A single boot sat beside it, molded by time and rot, untouched by animal or man. There were no bones, no graves, no crosses, just absence, thick and suffocating, like a ghost had walked through the land and swept all life away. The deeper he walked, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees stood tall and silent like watchmen, their gnarled limbs reaching toward the sky as if trying to block out the sun. Vines curled like tendrils across makeshift barricades built from logs and sandbags, now hollow and rotting from within. In one clearing, a rusted cannon lay on its side, half swallowed by the earth, its wheel cracked in two. A flagpole still stood nearby, but whatever flag it had once flown had been consumed by wind, weather, and time. He found no birds, no insects, no tracks of deer or rabbit. The world was lifeless, as if the forest itself had decided to hold its breath. And yet, something felt present just beyond sight, just out of reach. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, that eerie sensation of being watched, not by men, but by the place itself. The land remembered. He followed a stream, hoping it might lead to people, or at least to answers. But even the water ran strangely quiet, barely disturbing the rocks it passed over. He knelt beside it, splashing his face, hoping to shake free from the veil of unreality. The cold stung his skin, but it brought no clarity. His reflection stared back at him, unfamiliar and gaunt, with hollow eyes that held more questions than he could bear to ask. As he stood again, he noticed the remnants of an encampment just beyond the trees. This one looked different, less chaotic, more deliberate. The tents were pitched in neat rows, the fire pits carefully constructed. A few crates still stood intact. He approached, cautiously pulling back a flap of canvas, and found a journal lying beside a moldy bedroll. He opened it, flipping past pages of entries filled with military routine marches, rations, drills, until the final pages descended into erratic scribbles. Words like lost, cursed, and they never left repeated over and over, written in different hands. Some barely legible, others slashed with such force the paper tore. He dropped the book, backing away slowly. This was not just a place left behind. It was a place forgotten on purpose. Abandoned, not because of defeat, but because of fear. He turned from the camp and pressed forward, urgency building in his chest. The deeper he went, the more the forest felt like a labyrinth, each path looping back into itself. Time lost meaning. The light filtering through the branches never changed. It was neither morning nor afternoon. Just a constant, golden stillness that clung to the world like dust on old bones. And then, in the distance, he heard something, not a voice, not footsteps, music, a slow, mournful hum, faint as if drifting across time. He froze, heart thudding in his ears, trying to locate its source. It came from nowhere and everywhere, threaded through the wind, through the trees, through the very earth beneath his boots. And just as quickly as it came, it faded. His breath caught in his throat. He was not alone. Whatever had happened in these woods, it had not ended. Time no longer made sense. The man wandered through the endless forest, and the rhythm of day and night betrayed him. At times the sun would hang in the same place for hours, casting the same long shadow beneath the trees. Then suddenly, with no warning, dusk would fall like a shutter dropping, plunging the woods into a twilight that lingered far too long. There were moments when he thought he would slept only briefly, yet awoke to find the moon high, and the stars wheeling across the sky in patterns he did not recognize. Other times, hours passed in the blink of an eye. He had no watch, but even his instincts felt broken. Hunger and thirst came and went in unnatural cycles. At one point he realized he had not seen his own reflection in days, not in water, not in anything, and the idea of what he might look like now became as distorted as time itself. Worse yet was the compass. He would found it in the pocket of his coat, an old brass instrument with a cracked face, but when he opened it, the needle spun wildly, like a creature panicking in a cage. No matter which way he turned, it never settled. It danced in circles, mocking any attempt to find direction. North no longer existed. East and west were rumors. Only the trees seemed constant, yet even they whispered differently, depending on where he stood. He tried marking his path, carving small symbols into trunks or laying stones in certain patterns. But the forest betrayed him. The symbols vanished. The stones moved. One morning he stumbled upon a tree he had marked the day before, only to find his carving reversed, as though it had been etched from the inside of the bark outward. His mind began to fray. He spoke aloud to keep himself company, his voice the only familiar sound. "This is not right," he whispered once. "This is not how the world works." The forest replied with silence. Or worse, the echo of his own voice coming back at him from the wrong direction, delayed and distorted, like something imitating him just a little too late. Sleep offered no comfort. His dreams were flooded with fragmented memories, drums pounding, cannons firing, voices shouting names he did not recognize. Faces emerged from smoke and vanished before he could reach them. In one dream, he stood in a hospital tent soaked in blood, holding the hand of a man whose eyes begged for something, perhaps forgiveness, or perhaps a name. But when he awoke, all of it was gone. Only the trees remained. The silence was deeper now, and the forest more foreign. Once, in desperation, he climbed a ridge, hoping to find a landmark, anything beyond the sea of trees. But the land stretched endlessly in all directions. There were no mountains, no roads, no rivers. Just that unchanging, endless forest. No smoke on the horizon. No birds in the sky. No sound but his own heartbeat. Then came the wind. It blew without direction, circling around him in sudden bursts. With it came the faintest noises, snippets of music, like a fife being played off key, or the ghost of a drum roll echoing from far away. He froze, hoping, listening, but every time he moved toward the sound, it faded or twisted into something else. A branch snapping, a rustle of dead leaves, the creak of old leather. Reality no longer held firm, his surroundings bent at the edges, like an old photograph warping in heat. Sometimes he would catch sight of something that should not be there, a distant figure between the trees that vanished when he blinked, or a flicker of firelight that dissolved into shadow. He began to doubt the ground beneath his feet, unsure if he was walking in circles or simply existing outside the flow of time. In a clearing, he found a rusted rifle stuck barrel first into the dirt, surrounded by bones half swallowed by moss. The trees here were scorched, the earth blackened, but the fire had happened long ago, or just yesterday. There was no way to tell. Kneeling beside the weapon, he felt something shift inside him. Not a memory, exactly, but an echo. His fingers knew how to hold the gun, how to check the chamber, how to brace for recoil. It was as if muscle remembered what the mind had forgotten. He stared upward, toward the gray sky that never changed, and whispered, "What am I doing here?" No answer came, only the spinning of the compass, now lying on the ground beside him, its needle a blur of motion. Time here did not move forward. It coiled, like a snake waiting to strike, and he was trapped in its gaze. The forest gradually thinned, giving way to open land that bore the heavy scars of violence. The man stepped into a clearing shrouded in a strange, glowing mist, and his boots sank into churned-up mud that had long dried into ridged earth. The air was still, oppressively so, and eerily quiet. Not even the wind dared to move through the broken remnants scattered across the land. What lay before him was not simply a battlefield. It was a moment in time, perfectly preserved, and horrifyingly unnatural. Musket balls were lodged mid-air in tree trunks, embedded as if they had been fired only seconds ago. He moved closer and saw soldiers, hundreds of them locked in grotesque tableau. Union and Confederate alike, caught mid-motion, arms raised in defense, mouths open in unheard screams, sabers half-swung, bullets halted in flight just inches from flesh. They were not statues. They were not decayed or crumbled. Their uniforms were still bright with the grime and color of war, blood dried against blue and gray fabric in thick, brutal stains. The man stepped cautiously around them, heart pounding, careful not to disturb the frozen figures. His breath caught when he realized that none of the corpses had fallen. Not one body lay limp on the ground. They were upright, as if some invisible force had seized them at the apex of violence and suspended them in defiance of all natural laws. He reached out with a shaking hand toward one soldier, a young man in Confederate gray, barely older than a boy. His mouth hung open in what must have been a terrified cry, eyes wide with panic. The man hesitated, then pressed his fingers to the soldier's cheek. It was cold. Not the cold of death, but something deeper. The cold of something removed from time itself. His touch did not change anything. The soldier did not move. He remained frozen, preserved like a photograph etched into the living world. It was as if time had folded inward on this battlefield, refusing to let the moment die. Trees stood splintered from cannon blasts, their broken limbs hovering inches above the ground. A cannonball hung half buried in a hill, as though it had burrowed through space but never completed its path. Everywhere he turned, he saw motion-halted flags fluttering but never moving. Birds mid-flight trapped in silence. The smoke of musket fire lingering like frozen breath in the air. His mind reeled. He no longer knew whether it was night or day, whether an hour had passed or a week. The sky above seemed to pulse between hues of dawn and dusk. Never settling into a proper sun or moon, he looked down at his hands. They were trembling, but he could still feel the warmth of life in them. He was moving. He was real, but everything else around him had succumbed to something outside of reason. As he continued walking, he noticed signs of what may have come after the battle. Supplies scattered as if someone had tried to gather them hastily. A medical bag with tools laid out in an organized row. Bloodied bandages caught in the undergrowth. A child's drawing, half buried in the dirt, depicting a home far removed from this place. It was as though someone had been here after the carnage, searching, tending, or fleeing. And yet there were no footprints. No signs of retreat. Just the quiet, suffocating echo of war left unfinished. The man clutched his jacket tighter, the Union uniform unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. It was his only link to something tangible. He tried to remember how he got here, how the war had ended, or if it had ever ended at all, but his mind gave him nothing, just fragments of emotion, a sense of duty, and the name Miles echoing faintly in the back of his thoughts. He passed by a collapsed carriage with a shattered wheel. It looked freshly broken, the wood still splintered, as if it had cracked mere seconds ago. A crow perched on the broken frame, utterly still, its wings spread as though in mid-caw. He shouted at it, desperate to break the silence, but his voice was swallowed by the air. No echo, no answer, only stillness. The silence became oppressive. He found himself talking aloud, not to the frozen soldiers, but to himself, telling stories, joking nervously, pleading with whatever force had cursed this land to give him a sign, a reason, anything. And then, from somewhere deeper in the battlefield, came the faintest sound, a low hum, mechanical, rhythmic, and completely out of place. He froze, ears straining. It was distant but growing stronger. Not the sound of war, not even the sound of life. Something new, something wrong. He turned toward the sound, drawn by curiosity and dread in equal measure, and behind him he could have sworn he heard the crow move, just slightly, enough to rustle a feather. He did not look back. He walked faster, boots crunching the unmoving grass, pushing through the battlefield that defied time, searching for whatever truth lay at the heart of this unnatural stillness. Whatever was waiting, it was alive, and it knew he was coming. At nightfall, the forest transformed. The colors bled from the trees, and the sky darkened not with the calm of twilight, but with an oppressive weight that seemed to press in from every direction. The man, now covered in dust and sweat, tried to find shelter beneath a collapsed lean-to built from warped timber and faded canvas. He had come across it during the fading light, a ruined soldier's camp overrun by nature but eerily untouched by time. As he sat in the dimness, staring at the embers of a fire he could not remember starting, a strange unease crept over him. Not fear, something deeper, a gnawing sense that the forest was not empty at all, that it was watching. Then the sounds began, faint at first, like the breeze shifting through distant pines. But the longer he listened, the more distinct they became cries. Not the cry of an animal, nor the wind caught in the hollows of trees. These were human voices carried from somewhere beyond the veil of shadow and mist. Desperate, agonized, like wounded men calling out for help that would never come. He froze, straining his ears. The cries would rise, then abruptly vanish, swallowed by the silence. Then came whispering, soft, unintelligible. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, overlapping like leaves rustling in a cryptic breeze. Some seemed to whisper directly behind him, though when he turned, no one was there. Nothing was. Just darkness and trees. Shapes danced in the periphery of his vision. Shadows that moved not with the sway of branches, but with purpose. like sentinels pacing silently through the undergrowth. One moment they were there, the next they melted into bark and fog. He clutched his rifle tighter, though the weapon felt heavier now, like it had not been fired in 100 years. More disturbing still was that the forest did not feel merely haunted. It felt sentient. Once he caught a glimpse of movement just beyond a curtain of vines, a figure standing still between two trees, dressed in tattered blue like him, tall, unmoving, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. He stumbled deeper into the trees, as if seeking answers in the night. But the forest changed around him. Paths he had walked before twisted into unfamiliar shapes. The stars above blinked in and out of view like they too were unsure of their place in the sky. Even the moon seemed wrong, too large, too low, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the forest floor, like outstretched fingers reaching for his legs. He began to call out, not even sure what he was saying. Not names, he had no memory of names, but sounds, words spoken like a reflex from some past life. Still, the forest did not answer. It only echoed his voice back, warped and layered with whispers that were not his own. He passed by a clearing where shattered cannons lay half-buried in moss. The wheels rotted through and the barrels rusted over, but they had not aged naturally. It was as if they had been frozen, mid-use, then forgotten by time itself. Here, again, the shadows moved. He could feel their gaze. And from the treetops, he heard what sounded like boots scraping across bark, as if something or someone was circling above. Then the singing began, faint. A woman's voice, somewhere deep in the trees, lyrical, gentle, a lullaby almost. Out of place, but hauntingly beautiful. He followed it, drawn like a moth to flame. Branches whipped at his face, thorns tore at his sleeves, but still he pursued the melody until it vanished as suddenly as it began. He stood breathless in another clearing, empty, silent, the singing gone. The night deepened, but he could not rest. Whenever he closed his eyes, the sounds returned. Moaning, screams, the sound of galloping horses, of rifle shots cracking through the air. Though no muzzle flash lit the dark, he began to question whether he was alive at all, or if he was simply the memory of someone long dead, walking through a forest that had remembered too much. He recalled, vaguely, the notion of ghosts from old stories, spirits trapped in the places they died, forever repeating their last moments. But this did not feel like a haunting. It felt like a loop, a prison of time, as though the forest had absorbed not only the physical remnants of the war, but the very emotions, the fear, the agony, and now replayed them endlessly for anyone unlucky enough to enter. But why him? The question haunted him more than the voices. Why could he move, while everything else remained frozen? Why did the forest seem to respond to his presence, guiding, shaping, whispering? As the night gave way to a pale, distorted dawn, he sat beneath a tree with bark so black it looked burnt. Around him fog drifted low to the ground, and the air smelled faintly of ash. His hands trembled, though from cold or fear he could not say. And still, just beyond the veil of visibility, the shadows waited. In the stillness, he whispered to no one, "Am I alone?" The forest answered with silence. But from the corner of his eye, something moved. The forest air thickened with a haunting stillness as the man pressed deeper into its twisted heart. His steps, once hesitant, now moved with a strange urgency, as if something unseen beckoned him forward. Around him the terrain bore deeper wounds, scattered ammunition boxes, blood-stained flags clinging to broken branches, and shattered sabers half buried in the dirt. The remnants of battle were not just strewn across the ground, they were etched into the very atmosphere, vibrating with a silent tension that never fully dissipated. One morning, while crossing a shallow ravine choked with fog, he stumbled upon a rusted Union canteen, half buried beneath a collapsed knapsack. When his fingers touched it, something inside him jolted. The air grew heavy, and the forest around him seemed to ripple like heat waves rising off summer pavement. Then, without warning, the world around him vanished. He was no longer in the ravine. Instead, he stood amidst a line of soldiers' faces grim and youthful, holding rifles with shaking hands as cannon fire thundered from afar. Smoke clung to the air like a second skin. A sergeant barked orders. The man could feel the weight of a musket in his hands. The stiffness of his uniform soaked through with sweat and fear. He looked to his left and saw a boy, maybe 16, clutching a locket in one hand and a rifle in the other. Their eyes met brief, knowing, terrified. Just as suddenly as it began, the vision dissolved. He gasped, collapsing onto the cold, damp forest floor. The canteen rolled from his grasp, harmless once more. But the sensation lingered. That moment, real or imagined, had been more than just a vision. It had been a memory, his memory. From that point forward, the forest became a trigger. Each object he encountered, an officer's insignia, a pocket watch engraved with initials, even the torn hem of a Confederate banner awakened something dormant within him. Sometimes it was a full vision, a campfire circle where he and others laughed over bitter coffee and burnt beans, the choking dread of a midnight raid, the soft voice of a fellow soldier singing to himself to stay sane. Other times it was just a flash, a pang of sorrow, a swell of pride, a name rising to his lips before fading into the void. The man began to understand that the forest was more than abandoned. It was imprinted, saturated with memory. Some part of it remembered him, and in return, he began to remember himself. One evening, as dusk bled through the trees, he discovered a torn letter wedged beneath a shattered log. Its ink had faded, but a few lines remained legible. I think of you. With every sunrise, I pray you come back to me. He did not know the handwriting, but as he read, he felt warmth in his chest, followed by the unbearable weight of absence. Tears welled in his eyes without permission. He did not know who had written the letter, or who it was for, but its pain was unmistakably his. Nights grew more intense. He no longer merely saw shadows or heard distant voices. He spoke to them. Names formed on his lips, without thought: Eli, Tommy, Corporal Miles. He whispered apologies. He begged forgiveness. He made promises he did not understand. These were not dreams. These were ghosts of moments once lived, clawing their way back to the surface through the things he would touched. And yet, through it all, no answers emerged. Only more fragments, more pieces of a life he might have lived or still be living. Was he a soldier lost in time, a soul trapped between battles fought and forgotten, or just a man gone mad, wandering through the aftermath of someone else's war? He no longer questioned the visions. They were real in the only way that mattered. Each one, a shard of truth returning to him like scattered leaves caught in the wind. And with every vision came a growing sense of purpose, not just to survive, but to remember. By moonlight, he began collecting the objects that had triggered the memories. A pile of keepsakes grew inside a hollow tree trunk, a shrine to identities once worn and bonds once forged. It was all he had to anchor him to something real, something human. But there was still one thing missing: his name. He repeated every name he heard in the visions, every name that surfaced in whispers or battle cries, but none felt right on his tongue. Whoever he had been, whatever role he had played, the forest had not yet given him that final answer. And until it did, he would keep walking, keep remembering, because deep down he believed the forest would eventually lead him to the truth, or consume him entirely. The forest had grown colder, not in temperature, but in sensation, a creeping chill that seemed to rise from the very soil, clinging to his skin and seeping into his thoughts. The trees, once indifferent sentinels, now stood like watchful witnesses, their gnarled limbs stretched out like fingers frozen in mid-reach. He wandered without a sense of direction, no longer trusting the erratic sun overhead or the spinning needle of his compass. Time, like everything else in this forsaken place, had unraveled into fragments. It was then he began to see them. At first it was only the flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, a flash of blue, a rustle in the underbrush, the metallic glint of a bayonet reflecting non-existent sunlight. But as he turned to face these fleeting images, nothing stood there. Just wind brushing through the leaves and the distant groan of branches. Yet something had changed in the air, a tension building, like the prelude to thunder. Then the visions sharpened. Across a clearing, near the remnants of a shattered cannon, he saw them, spectral figures emerging from the mist, dozens of men, in Union and Confederate uniforms, moved with mechanical precision, locked in an eternal loop. One clutched his stomach, bloodless hands trying endlessly to hold in what had already spilled out. Another stumbled forward, tripping over an unseen root, his mouth open in a scream that produced no sound. A third soldier stood, musket raised, firing into the distance again and again, though the musket gave no spark, and the foe he fought had long since vanished. The man stood frozen, breath caught in his throat, unsure if he had truly crossed into madness. These were not simply phantoms. They were moments, fragments of history preserved, like insects in amber, repeating their final actions as if unaware that the world had moved on. Their eyes were hollow, their faces etched with despair, rage, and disbelief. Some reached for comrades who were not there. Others charged at enemies that no longer existed. It was not like watching a play. It was like being caught in a looped reel of memories too traumatic to dissolve. He stepped cautiously through the haunted field, and the ghostly forms paid him no mind. They moved through him, around him, their battlefield superimposed over the present, like a faded double exposure. He felt the wind of their passing, the vibrations of their footfalls, though they made no sound. Every now and then, one would freeze locked in the instant of death, eyes wide and staring directly at him before fading like smoke into the gloom. He found himself at the heart of a trench, now collapsed and choked with roots, but still alive in the memories of those who'd perished there. A Confederate soldier knelt beside a fallen friend, fingers trembling as he tried to rouse him, oblivious to the fact that the man had been dead for over a century. Nearby, a Union drummer boy sat against a blood-slicked log, tapping his hands on invisible drums, the same rhythm echoing faintly in the air, though no sound escaped his ghostly palms. The man could not look away. It was as if the very ground was saturated with grief, not just from the violence of war, but from its incompletion, its refusal to end. These souls were not merely dead. They were trapped, repeating their final acts in a futile attempt to change what had already happened. He felt something deep within himself resonate with their plight, a sense of sorrow he could not place, as if some part of him remembered standing among them, hearing the whistle of bullets and the roar of cannons. Could he have been one of them? That question haunted him more than the spirits themselves. He sat beside the rusted shell of a caisson, watching the silent battle unfold again and again. Time had become meaningless. He no longer knew how many days or nights had passed. The sun continued its strange, jerking path across the sky. The forest never truly slept. The cries he had heard in the dark now had faces, names, stories. They were no longer shadows. They were echoes, and he had become their witness. A low rumble shook the trees, a soundless boom that vibrated through the soil but carried no air. It was as if the land itself was trying to remember, or perhaps forget. The man stood, weak at the knees, and took one final look at the scene around him. He wanted to help them, but how does one save the dead from memories that won't let go? Inside the darkened shell of an abandoned cabin, half sunken into the earth and swallowed by ivy, the man steps carefully over broken floorboards and splintered furniture. The air is thick with mildew and memory. As he explores, his flashlight flickers across walls marked by soot and cracked portraits long forgotten. Then he sees it on a small wooden table beneath a broken window. A yellowed envelope rests alone, coated in dust, the name on it unmistakable. His name! His fingers hesitate before reaching for it. The envelope's paper is coarse, the ink slightly smeared, as if written in a hurry or by trembling hands. As he unfolds the letter, a shiver runs through him, not from the cold, but from the recognition of the handwriting. It is his. Every curve, every flourish of the pen is intimately familiar, yet he has no memory of ever writing it. The letter is short, urgent, and deeply unsettling. Do not forget who you are. You have been here before. That is why you were sent back. The forest remembers. The battle remembers. And now so must you. He reads the lines again and again, his mind reeling. Was this a cruel trick, a hallucination brought on by isolation and fatigue, or something far more disturbing proof that time in this place does not flow as it should? He lowers the letter slowly. Outside, The wind rustles the dead leaves with an unnatural rhythm, like a whisper. He steps back out of the cabin, holding the note as if it were a lifeline to a version of himself he no longer understands. The forest around him hums with a strange tension, as though it too has read the message and waits for his next move. The visions come more frequently now. When he brushes against certain relics, an old bayonet embedded in a stump, a tattered soldier's journal wedged beneath a rock, a helmet split by shrapnel. His mind is jolted back into fragmented memories. He sees faces he almost remembers, feels the weight of a rifle in his arms, smells the cordite and blood of battles fought long ago. They feel real, too real. Are they his memories, or the lingering ghosts of others who once walked this cursed woodland? One night, as fog settles thick between the trees and moonlight is strangled by the canopy, he finds himself drawn to a clearing he has never seen before. In its center stands a twisted tree, scorched black, its bark carved with names and dates, some familiar, some foreign. As he traces a name with his fingertip, the ground beneath him seems to breathe. The letter flutters in his pocket. The forest seems to watch. Suddenly, the silence shatters. Cries echo from unseen places, agonized, desperate, human. Shadows flicker at the edge of his vision. He spins, flashlight beam catching nothing, yet the feeling of being surrounded tightens like a noose. The tree groans in the wind. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stops. The woods return to stillness, but something within him has changed. He sits by the tree for hours, clutching the letter. Slowly, he realizes the message was not a warning. It was a trigger. A spark meant to awaken a part of him long buried. The battlefields he has wandered through frozen moments, soldiers caught mid-sprinter scream, were more than scenes of decay. They were memories suspended in time, playing endlessly for those willing to see. And now, he does. The ghostly soldiers he has watched repeat their final actions were not simply apparitions. They were echoes of decisions made, paths chosen, and fates sealed. And somehow, he is a part of it all. Back at the cabin, he sits in the quiet once again. He lays out everything he has found. The letter, the dog tags, the torn maps, the sketches of platoon formations that match the ones in his dreams. As he pieces it together, a theory takes shape. This place is a loop. A battlefield buried not just in history, but in memory. And it has been waiting for someone like him to return. Maybe he was a soldier here once. Maybe he died and was given a second chance. Or perhaps, far more hauntingly, he never truly left. Perhaps, like the others, he is trapped in this time-warped forest, a living memory, haunting itself. And yet he feels something shift. He now knows his name, his story, the faces of those who fought beside him. The truth, fragmentary as it is, has weight. It anchors him. Maybe it is the key to breaking free. He stands, pocketing the letter again, but this time not as a question, but as a compass. The night feels different. The cries have faded. The whispers have grown quiet, and the path forward, while still shrouded in mist, no longer feels aimless. Because now he remembers, and the forest remembers him too. The man moved through the forest with cautious steps, branches cracking beneath his boots. The trees stood like silent sentinels, draped in a mist that refused to lift, as if the woods themselves were trying to hide something. At night the air turned cold and still, and distant cries echoed faintly between the trees, sometimes muffled, sometimes clear enough to resemble his name. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision. He would turn, expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. The forest was playing tricks on him, or something inside it was. He stumbled across a path littered with the remnants of battle, broken rifles, shattered helmets, and corpses locked in mid-motion. Some reached toward the sky. Others were mid-shout, mouths open in frozen agony. Time had stopped here, not metaphorically, but literally. Even the smoke from distant fires lingered in the air, like an oil painting suspended between brushstrokes. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a rising, inexplicable familiarity. These grounds were not unknown to him. The deeper he walked, the more warped the world became. Daylight came and went without warning. Sometimes, The sun hovered above the horizon for hours, as if unsure whether to set or rise. Other times, night fell suddenly, draping the forest in a velvet blackness that devoured sound. Compasses spun erratically, as if they, too, were trying to find a way out. Objects along the way triggered strange reactions. A rusted canteen sent a jolt through his skull, images of laughter around a campfire, the scent of burnt meat, the chorus of footsteps on gravel. A torn glove in the mud made his hand tremble uncontrollably. Vivid memories or dreams flashed before his eyes. He saw faces, friends, brothers in arms. The details slipped away before he could hold on to them. But each item whispered a story, and somehow they all felt like fragments of his own. One night he came upon a small, rotting cabin, half buried in overgrowth. Inside, dust hung in the air like a second skin. On a table sat a weathered envelope. He opened it with trembling fingers and froze. The handwriting was unmistakably his. The letter spoke to him like an echo from the past. Don't forget who you are. The forest feeds on lost names. Stay awake. Stay you? The warning only deepened his uncertainty. How had he written it? When? The implications gnawed at him. Was he trapped in some experiment? A nightmare? Or worse, was this limbo? The sense of self began to slip, as if he were becoming part of the place rather than passing through it. Wandering further, he saw them, ghostly figures moving across the fields. Not mist, not tricks of the eye. These were soldiers, pale, translucent, yet painfully vivid. They fought invisible enemies, cried out in pain, clutched their wounds, and collapsed again and again, stuck in an eternal loop. One knelt beside a fallen comrade, lips trembling, eyes wide with anguish. Another charged into the fog only to vanish mid-run. They were reliving their final moments, unable to escape them. He called out to one once, but the figure did not see him. It passed straight through, leaving a chill in its wake. Eventually, the question that had been creeping around the edges of his thoughts grew louder. Was he one of them? A fragment of the battlefield's memory, a soul left behind. The visions blurred the line between past and present, between what he observed and what he remembered. He touched his face. It felt real. But so did the ghost soldiers. So did the letter. So did the cries in the night. And yet, no matter how much he tried to piece things together, nothing aligned. The forest refused to give answers, only more signs that he was not a visitor here. But something caught in its rhythm. Not quite living, not quite gone. By the time the sun rose again, if it was truly morning, he had stopped looking for a way out. Instead, he walked toward the mist, hoping that whatever lay beyond would finally reveal the truth. Or perhaps he already knew it. He walks deeper into the stillness of the forest, the trees thick with silence, the air heavy with something he can't name. Each step seems both aimless and drawn by a force he does not understand. Days ago, he is no longer sure how many he woke among the ruins of a battlefield, where weapons lay scattered, rusted and broken, beside the long, faded bones of the fallen. The fields stretch wide and empty, time arrested in that moment of chaos. Bayonets locked in a final charge, cannon barrels half buried in dirt, uniforms turned to dust, yet something about it feels unfinished. Like a story caught mid-sentence. At night the forest changes. The trees whisper. He hears cries in the distance, some pained, some pleading, and sometimes a name that might be his. Shadows flit between the trees, shapes that do not belong to animals. Sometimes he turns and finds nothing. Other times something lingers just long enough to vanish when he blinks. He no longer trusts silence, nor the stillness, not after hearing footsteps just behind him, always behind, but never seen. One night he finds an old revolver beside a collapsed wagon wheel. The moment his fingers touch it, a vision overtakes him, men shouting in a fog of smoke and blood, a friend dragging him behind cover, and then pain shocking, total. The vision ends with him gasping for air, curled on the dirt. It is not the first time. Bits of memory, or hallucinations, keep surfacing. A harmonica tune half remembered, the voice of someone laughing in a language he can't quite place, the press of a uniform on his shoulders. Are these his memories, or someone else's? He stumbles across a ravine, and there, at the edge, he sees them ghostly soldiers, translucent and pale, performing the same desperate acts over and over. One charges with a bayonet. Another reloads a rifle with shaking hands. A third slumps, clutching his stomach, then vanishes. They do not see him. Or maybe they do, and simply no longer care. Their eyes are hollow, trapped in an endless reenactment. They haunt the landscape, remnants of something unresolved, something unfinished. Later he finds an old cabin, half swallowed by vines. Inside, dust thickens the air. But on a rotted desk, he finds a letter. It is addressed to him. His name familiar but strange, written in a full hand that is undoubtedly his own. The paper is torn, ink faded, but the words strike through the haze. Do not forget who you are. This place feeds on the lost. He does not remember writing it. He does not even remember his full name. But the weight of the warning lands like a stone in his chest. He tries to leave the forest, walking in a straight line, using the sun to mark his path. But the trees rearrange themselves. He passes the same rusted cannon 3 times. The ground loops. Time warps. One afternoon bleeds into the next. His mind begins to crack. He no longer knows what is real. The ghosts, the memories, the whispering trees. Was there ever a war? Or is this war all there ever was? One evening, as the mist thickens and shadows grow teeth, he meets himself. Not a reflection, but another version, same face, same eyes, but harder, older. This version wears the gray of a Confederate soldier, the uniform faded but proud. The other hymn speaks slowly. You never left. None of us did. The war did not end here, not for us. He reaches out, but the moment is gone. Only the echo remains. Now the man walks not with confusion, but a rising dread. He begins to understand this place is not a forest. It is a memory. A prison built from regret, loss, and things left undone. Perhaps he died here. Perhaps he is dying still. But if he forgets who he was, if he lets the forest take the last fragments of his name, his purpose, he will become one of them, a figure in the mist, endlessly repeating the worst moment of his life. Still, something deep inside him resists, a will, a thread. He holds on to the letter, reads it each night before sleep, or whatever sleep is here. He repeats the words like a prayer. Do not forget who you are. Somewhere beyond this purgatory, he believes, the war truly ended. Peace waits. But only if he remembers. Only if he keeps walking. He stands alone in the clearing, the pine needles crunching under his boots like brittle bones. The mist coils low over the earth, whispering secrets in a language just out of reach. The forest has grown quieter in recent days, not because it has grown empty, but because it waits. It waits for him to remember. And then he does. It does not arrive in a single thunderous moment. Instead, the truth creeps in slowly, piecing itself together through the haze-fragmented memories that had danced on the edges of his consciousness, now lock into place like rusted gears grinding back to motion. He was a soldier. Not just any soldier, but one who bore witness to decisions that fractured his soul. He remembers the march south under orders he never believed in, the faces of young boys who followed him, wide-eyed and trusting, thinking they were marching for honor. He remembers the villages burnt not out of necessity, but out of fear. And he remembers the moment that broke him, the orders to execute captured enemies who had surrendered. He had refused. That refusal did not save them. It did not spare their lives. It only condemned him to live with the knowledge that his protest changed nothing. His conscience had drawn a line, but the war erased it. This forest, this cursed stretch of land where the sun filters through branches like light through stained glass, is not just haunted. It is constructed a purgatory built not by divine punishment, but by the weight of his own guilt. Every echo, every whisper in the leaves, every glimpse of spectral soldiers reliving their final agonizing moments, it is all his memory, repeating itself on loop, demanding he face what he could not accept in life. He wanders to the creek bed where he once knelt, blood washing from his hands as he prayed for forgiveness he did not believe he deserved. Now the water flows black. He watches as ghostly hands reach up through the current, pleading, accusing, mirroring his own. When he returns to the cabin, the one that somehow always reappears, no matter how far he strays, he finds the letter again. His own handwriting, the ink smudged and weathered. Do not forget who you are. But now he knows. He is not just a man lost in the woods. He is a soul stranded in his own mind, reliving a war that has long since ended. At least for the world, but not for him. And then he sees himself, or rather, a version of himself, dressed in the gray uniform he once wore. The man stands at attention beneath a dying oak, his eyes hollow, his mouth drawn in the grim determination of a soldier who still believes he is doing what is right. I have been waiting, the double says. We all have. Who are you? He asks, though the answer already scratches at the back of his throat. I am who you were when you stopped listening to your heart, when duty blinded you to the cost. This place, this endless patrol, it is the war we never left. He wants to argue, to insist he did not choose this. But deep down, he knows that is not true. He never found peace. Not after the surrender, not after laying down arms. He never forgave himself for the lives lost, the orders carried out, or the silence that followed his disobedience. He had tried to bury it all, his guilt, his grief, his past. But this forest is where all of it bloomed into something tangible. The ghosts are his memories, and the horrors are his truths. He created this place, and now he must unmake it. But how? The ghostly soldiers still march through the trees, eternally reliving their final acts. Some scream, some whisper, some simply stare at him with eyes that accuse and plead in equal measure. He realizes that they do not need him to suffer, they need him to see. To acknowledge what they endured and what he could not stop, to accept that redemption does not come through punishment, but through understanding. He kneels again in the clearing, the one where he once hesitated to give a cruel order, and in that stillness, he speaks aloud the names he remembers. One by one, men from both sides, friends, enemies, victims, all human. The wind picks up, not in violence, but in peace. The shadows thin. The voices no longer cry, they sing. Low, mournful, beautiful. The version of himself in gray slowly lowers his head and vanishes. The weight in his chest begins to lift, if only slightly. He is still here, still trapped, but he is no longer running from what brought him here. The path forward is not escape, but reconciliation. He does not know if this place will ever release him, but for the first time he is not afraid to walk it with open eyes. And in the far distance, beyond the trees where daylight breaks like a promise, he sees a narrow trail winding through the mist, one that was never there before. The wind picked up, rustling through the branches as if the forest itself had taken a breath. He stood at the center of the clearing, surrounded by the lingering echoes of footsteps long faded, voices that once cried out in fury or fear, now reduced to distant murmurs. The air was thick, not just with mist, but with memory. The trees seemed to lean in, watching, listening. He clenched the letter tighter in his hand, the ink smeared from damp fingers. The words he had written, words he did not remember writing, burned into his mind. Don't forget who you are. But who was he? A soldier, a deserter, a man lost in time, trapped by guilt and regret. He turned toward the figure that had spoken to him, his mirror in Confederate gray. That version of himself stood silent now, fading like smoke caught in moonlight. His eyes, however, lingered, watchful, burdened, knowing. The war never ended in this place for me, the echo had said. But maybe it could now. He took a step forward, no longer afraid of the shadows that danced in the undergrowth. They were not demons, not specters sent to torment him. They were memories, fragments of a life torn by impossible choices. And maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for acknowledgement, for release. Around him, the forest began to shift. Not violently, not with the suddenness of an earthquake or the fury of a storm, but gently, as if it too had been holding its breath for a very long time, The trees grew fainter, less solid. The cries and whispers dulled. The moonlight stretched and shimmered, transforming into something more radiant than before, something warm, forgiving. He looked down and saw the earth beneath his boots dissolve into a pale, glowing mist. His uniform faded, not in shame, but as though it had served its purpose and could now rest. The figure in gray nodded once, solemn and slow, before dissolving into light. And then there was silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of resolution. He felt weightless, not like floating, but like being unburdened. A sense of clarity surged through him. The pain, the doubt, the confusion, they had shaped him, but they did not define him. He had lived, he had chosen, and he had remembered. Whether this was the end or the beginning, he no longer feared it. The light around him intensified, not blinding but enveloping, like sunlight behind closed eyes. The forest disappeared, replaced by endless white. There was no sound, no boundary, no pain, just stillness and peace. And then it was over. Or perhaps just beginning. Thank you for walking with us through this haunting tale, one of memory, redemption, and the quiet ghosts that linger when the world forgets. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep within, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you won't miss what comes next. We have more stories, some dark, some hopeful, all unforgettable, waiting just for you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And as always, sleep well.